This is a patient who was used to a refractive outcome previously in the past, loved his vision until the cataracts really developed. So he wanted that accuracy. When I was considering a 6 millimeter scleral tunnel, where it looked like it had been done sort of before, he had a lot of vascular ingrowth and he was developing a little scleromalacia as well. So I wasn't really sure kind of where that previous scleral tunnel had gone through. I didn't want to intersect it, and I didn't want to really, he's a high isomyope. I really didn't want to run into issues with his sclera. So ultimately what I proposed was, let's take this out from a 6 millimeter superior corneal incision. De-oncluating the ICL is quite easy. For those of you who've done it before, you can use a Sinskey hook, any blunt instrument. I use the viscoelastic cannula most of the time. Flip that ICL, get in the vertical meridian. You can use Buddha forceps then and just explant it. I put 3 corneal sutures in, took them out 1 month later, and then you can see the difference in topography here between the time before surgery and after surgery. Notice I've induced 2 diopters of corneal astigmatism. So let me turn it back to the panel now. We're thinking maybe we weren't thinking multifocal, we're thinking light adjustable lens there. How do you handle that, though, that much corneal astigmatism when you got maybe 3 diopters or so of correction with the LAL?
We can still, as you know, with a light adjustable lens, you can adjust up to about 2.5 diopters of astigmatism. The challenge, though, is this is against the rule. There's probably going to be even more refractive. And also the patient's very unhappy until you make that first adjustment, because in its virgin state, the light adjustable lens is a monofocal lens. So given how regular this topography is, I would probably lean more towards a toric monofocal to really give the patient that wow effect right off the bat.
Yeah, he didn't want that. He wanted the light adjustable lens. He wanted that accuracy. Now, I tend to make my corneal incisions, my main incisions right at 180, 0-180, lined up nicely. So what we did here was we used the LENSAR ally laser, did a 40-degree arcuate AK at about 4 degrees, lined up nicely with my main incision. You can see that debulked the astigmatism quite a bit. He was fine. I mentioned in advance we may have to wait a little bit longer for that refractive stability because we're making that AK. Used a 4.9 millimeter capsulotomy. I just saw him back after a couple years for a YAG, but he ended up +1/4, -1/4 in that right eye. He had a little hyperopic shift post lock-in in the left eye, but wasn't too bothered by that.
The biggest lesson I've learned with RK patients is that if they wear glasses, if they come in wearing glasses and they've been wearing glasses for whatever, the last 10 or 20 years successfully, it's a great opportunity to use the LAL, because the LAL can mimic glasses with a standard refraction, right? If they come in and they have a history of wearing RGPs for most of their life, maybe had to stop wearing them recently because of the cataracts or something, but they're used to them, then go with a monofocal lens and have them go back to RGPs, because the LAL will be pale in comparison to the quality of the RGP vision. So I kind of learned that the hard way.
Monofocal or small aperture, I think, in those patients. The other key thing is to have them come in around the same time for their manifest and adjustments, because as we know with post-RK, they can fluctuate depending on how many cuts they have. So if one visit is in the morning and another one in the afternoon, you're going to be chasing a moving target. And these patients should know that 20/20 is not the goal. It's 20 happy, and that this is a technology, this is a lens technology that can get them closest to their target only if they have a regular corneal curvature and measurements. And the question was, how long does it take? Usually I tell patients about 5 months. That is a 5-month course for the post-RK patients.
And since this is an ally user meeting, I will bring it back to this. And I was going to say, I love using ally for so many reasons, but RK patients are one that, just because you can get skip lesions and it's just one more source of, variability, I don't actually laser RK patients. And I'm curious if people on the panel, are you doing ally for
AK?
your cat frag?
Yeah. So for a long time, I didn't use femtosecond laser on RK patients in general, until someone I know doing it. And with the LENSAR, for the few cases I've done, because the interface is so good, I'm just curious to see if you guys have any problem with the capsulotomy through the AK incision. I have not.
That's rare. I use laser for all my RK patients, unless for some reason we can't. And I can think of one case maybe in the past 3 years where there was a little skip and I just had to manually complete it.
Same. I use it all the time.
I think it's important to just expect skipped areas or tags, and don't just pull on the cap, but rather go around as though you're going to do a capsulotomy, and break the tags. But I agree with you. I think it does a really great job going through the RKs.
All right, so thanks everyone. I think this has been a great meeting so far, and I'm going to present some, for the first time, some data on comparing low level of astigmatism correction between 0.6 diopters and 1.1 diopters, AK using my proprietary formula, the Wurstkupta formula, and the lowest power toric, the Invista 125. We're basically using the Invista monofocal with AKs in half the group and the Invista MX60 ET 125 with the Barrett toric calculator in the other group. So the other thing that's different and valid criticism perhaps is that we did have a little bit less astigmatism when we took these cohorts in the AK group and a little bit higher astigmatism in the toric group, which you would kind of expect. You know, if you're kind of deciding, okay, this patient might lean a little bit more towards toric, they may be a little bit higher in that 0.6 to 1.1 diopter range. So that's the only thing that's statistically significant. But postoperatively, the results were actually equivalent. There was no statistically significant difference in the astigmatism postoperatively using AKs or toric, which I thought was very interesting. If you look here also, we have about 92% of patients within a half diopter when you're looking at postoperative astigmatism with the AK and 90% with the low power toric. So again, no statistically significant difference, and actually really pretty incredibly good correction of astigmatism that's on par with Denise Visco's data, which is the best data I've seen. So I was very happy to be in good company there, Denise. So we were actually kind of surprised that the data was so good. I was kind of expecting the toric to outperform the AKs, but we're showing equivalence really with both treatments. When you look at the manifest refraction spherical equivalent, we were at about 90, over 92% within a half diopter. So not only with this treatment are we getting good coupling of the AKs, we're not getting any weirdness with the refraction results. We're getting excellent refractive results. It's not just astigmatism control. And then when you look at every other factor that we looked at, whether it was best corrected visual acuity between both groups, they were right around 2015. There were no losses of visual acuity. Some people will make an argument that an AK can induce irregularities. We didn't see any of that. With refractive accuracy, we were close to Plano in both groups. Again, equivalent. Confirming our refractive targeting success. We also did subgroup analyses. So we looked at the with the rule group versus against the rule groups and found the exact same trends. A little bit higher preoperative astigmatism with the toric group than the AK group. But in terms of the outcomes, whether it was astigmatism correction or uncorrected vision or spherical equivalent refraction, there was no statistically significant difference in either group. That was actually a little bit frustrating. I was kind of wanting to know the actual answer, what's better, but it turns out that with this laser and with good technology, you can get great results. We also did vector analysis and showed good grouping with no statistical advantage in either group. And we know this is safe. We know that both of these treatments are safe, so we're really, really happy about that. I'll throw in one other little pearl here. It's been really nice to work on this study with a colleague's son. So Jake Weinstock has been helping me collect some of this data, and it's been a real treat to get to work with him. So that's just a little added bonus. But the conclusions that we came to really is that AKs, when you're using a modern formula, I've got a little interest in this, it's the Wurstkupta formula, with the LENSAR Ally with IntelliAxis. And that's a really important thing as well. You got to make sure you're putting the arcs on the intended axis. And if you're putting a toric in, you want to make sure you're using image guidance with those tabs. I think that might be what is making this study shine maybe a little bit more than other studies is we're using the best technology. We're injecting that data into the laser. We're putting the toric where it should be. We're putting the AKs where we want. So we find that with both treatment options in that range, you're in good company. There is no advantage of either. They both work great. And I think you can feel confident that either is a great choice. So.
We have a patient that has 0.51 diopters of astigmatism. It's at this axis. Axis is about 8 or 10. Obviously, the axis is critical because it's not just 0.5. We should be measuring the total astigmatism. And so while the keratometry says 0.5, if you look at total astigmatism, we have a couple of devices. This one says, it's almost 1 diopter of astigmatism. So we do have to pay attention to the orientation because it's not the magnitude, it's also the axis that's critical and how to adjust things. This is a patient that has a little bit more astigmatism. And if you put in the calculator, it tells us that If you start with 1.25, you would subtract about 0.5 to 0.6. So you'd end up with a non-toric lens here with about 0.66 diopters of astigmatism. I'll just point that right there. So we decided to look at our patients. It was kind of a retrospective study. It kind of made it into a registry, but looking at, combining the low power toric lenses with, iris registration and femto laser, which is why, why we're all here. We looked at two different types of lenses. We had 32 female and 12 male eyes that were part of the registry. And you can see that we had 87% of our patients that were targeted for distance achieved 20/25 or better uncorrected vision. We had 37 of 41 eyes that were within 0.5 diopters of spherical equivalent. For our astigmatism results, we started off with an average total corneal astigmatism using the ASCRS 700 of about 1 diopter. At the end, after the toric lenses, they ended up with an average of about 0.32. So we had a reduction of about 0.7 diopters on average. And we ended up with 33 of 41s had a refractive cylinder of 0.5 or less post-op. And then we had 95 that were 0.75 diopters or less post-op. But the key is that we have 3 different devices, and that's always a challenge. They don't always say exactly the same thing. So here's a patient is in our registry, and with the IOLSar 700, her Ks were 0.34 diopters at axis 9. Okay, the topography was 0.47. The pentacam was 0.6. This is all anterior astigmatism. You can see the topography doesn't look great. It's a little bit irregular, but again, when you have horizontal astigmatism, we know from the nomograms we're going to have to add. And then also to look at the total corneal power on the 2 devices that both the Cassini and ALMASTER 700 showed a little bit more, 0.63 and 0.78. So here, I felt using toric lens would be helpful because our goal is to get as close to 0 as possible. And I'm personally not a fan of AKs because of dry eye and other issues. So again, I like to use toric lenses in this case. And this is our patient did. We did end up using the J&J lens. You can see the patient ended up, again, sometimes it may be just, there's differences in, the nomogram said we should have flipped the axis a bit. In refraction, we did not, but overall, you see the patient did quite nicely by using a toric lens in this case. So again, there's lots of reasons could be off axis. Very impressed with Gary's results because sometimes patients end up with dry eye afterwards. So they're not going to end up 20/25 or 20/20 because of dry eye and other issues. One thing I didn't also do is we didn't double check a month after surgery to double check the IOLs were in the perfect condition, perfect orientation, because there's a small chance they could have rotated. But again, because there's a registry, we didn't go back and look to see if any of those that weren't quite perfect had rotated a bit overall. And obviously, as I mentioned, we have to do look at the ocular surface. And of course, I think my son Josh, who spent the summer and helped out with this project. So Rob, I didn't realize your son was available too. I should have tried to get him to work at. Oh yes, Gary's son, perfect. Yeah. So perfect. So hopefully this is a good overview of this topic. And again, I am a little bit more of a fan of toric lenses because of but I think both technologies can work well for our patients. Thank you.
Well, great talk. Awesome. I find, with the higher the astigmatism, the easier it is to nail the axis. The lower the astigmatism, the harder it is, right? And so when we get down into these ranges, I much prefer, particularly with the Ally and the registration, to put the laser AKs in, either not open them or open them based on aura, and or you can do it afterwards in the clinic with a refraction rather than to place a toric lens in these lower ranges. Thanks.
Yeah, great comments.
I wanted to ask Gary a question because I thought these are both really interesting data sets with great outcomes for both. Gary, you did a subgroup analysis of against and with the rule in terms of your outcomes, but I was curious, did you have more AKs in the with the rule and more torics in the against the rule? Did you look at that?
Groups were pretty close, but yeah, there was a trend for more torics in the against the rule group and more AKs but it was fairly balanced. It was like 20 and 30 and 20 and 30 the other ways.
And can I ask you, when you are treating the against the rule with limbo relaxing incisions, are you putting your main incision superiorly or are you on axis?
No, with our formula, we always require the incision to be either exactly at 0 or exactly at 180. And that's actually marked on the Ally. And now you can actually have your frag pattern aligned with the 180 and 90 if you want. So I actually use the frag pattern to line up my incision.
And how much are you taking into account posterior cornea in the formula? Is it different for different axes, or is it the same value that you are at?
With the Barrett Universal 2, with the Barrett toric calculator with veracity, we are accounting for posterior corneal astigmatism with toric IOLs. But with our formula, we have found that it gets weird when you start planning AKs based on TK. So our formula is based on anterior keratometry only.
The purpose of this project here was to see how far can we go with these arcuate incisions, how accurate can we make them. So the goal was to try to use anything at our disposal in machine learning to see how accurate can we make them. And so what I did is a retrospective analysis. This is a line that has astigmatism at the bottom and the x-axis, and it has the arcuate. And obviously, the higher astigmatism, the higher the arcuate. And you look at your data and you kind of adjust these little knobs up and down. And you also have an age factor that you adjust up and down. And that's really kind of what is done right now with the Ally. And then we have some nomograms, that uses more regression analysis, so a more kind of mathematical way of doing it. But the goal here is how do we improve? Can we improve it even further? Can we leverage more input data? Maybe there are factors that we're not looking at that might be important. For example, what about white to white? Maybe in eyes that are wider, the arcuates placed at 9 millimeter diameter might have a very different effect than that in very small eyes, right? Or maybe just having different machines. What is the interaction between the Cassini and the IOL master? These are all things that could potentially be a factor. And that's what machine learning is really good at. We may not understand all of the interactions at play, but it's very good with these algorithms of trying to understand the complex interplay that may not be captured in a regression analysis. So the other goal is also to have a system that you can update and you can customize. So what we did is we had we started with some of Denise's data. We had over 700 patients that she offered, and it was great data. And we started with that, and then we started kind of paring it down a little bit in terms of seeing some outliers, some incomplete data, patients that didn't have really great vision, which most of them did. We kept bringing it down, and then I also added a few of my own cases because she tended to do more paired incisions, and I wanted to see what happens with single incisions as well as another feature. So we got to a little bit over 400 eyes there. When you think about machine learning, you think about, this feeds into the model to get this. So arcuate incisions is the final thing that we want, the label. One of the most important factors, parameters, whatever you want to call it, is this treated astigmatism value, which is going to be defined as the amount of astigmatism that you started with, and then from that, you subtract the amount of astigmatism that you ended up with. So if you started with 0.5 diopters of astigmatism at 90, and you end up with 0.25 at 90, well, you've treated 0.25 of astigmatism. That's an important factor because that's what's going to be that's how our model is going to get better based on our outcomes. So that's essentially why I was able to do a retrospective study, but still create a better model. This factor. But the only trick is that you're going to have to basically, if you have two different axes, you have to subtract apples to apples. So you just have to do some trigonometry to basically convert the axis to the original axis. This is just a plot of some of our data. So you could see treated astigmatism, that value I described at the X, and the length of the arcuate on the Y. And you can see that, for any one of these points, like obviously the trend here, I don't have the laser, but obviously the trend here is that it's upward sloping. But you could see, if you look at 0.5 of treated astigmatism, there are a lot of points that could fall on. So clearly, treated astigmatism is not the only thing that matters. There are other factors at play. And that's the point of doing a machine learning model, because then you can start putting in these other factors and seeing how do you get even better. And this is what machine learning is, or AI. The green stuff are factors, things that we think may contribute. The red is our final outcome. And basically what you do is you take 80% of the data set and you train it to see if it could find the complex interplay of this. And then you test it. Once you have a trained model with the weights, then you test it on the remaining 20% of the data. And you repeat that with different subsegments to get an average over 5. That's called cross-validation. And then basically you accept it or you start over. And then when you hear the term inference, that just means you're using the model. You're not training it anymore. You're just going to use it, plug and play. So when we look at the first model, we use a gradient boosting algorithm. It's very common for tabular data. And what we found is a really, really decent model here. You could see what the different factors, those bars, the longer the bar, that means that more of an effect that it had. Obviously, astigmatism is the biggest effect, and age is going to be second, right? And what we found is that in this retrospective analysis, that the margin of error, so that the arcuate incision, we can have pretty good confidence that it was within 2 degrees of what it should have been. So if you got 17-degree paired arcs, could it have been 19 paired arcs? Probably, yeah, could have been 15. but it has a pretty good significance there. And then the second model that we ran, this was really thanks to Dustin, who's head of research at LENSAR. So what we want to do is create the best of both worlds. So you have neural networks like ChatGPT is a neural network, right? With hallucinates. It's a black box. You don't know what's going on. So combine that with something we can interpret, like linear regression. Combine the two together, that's a monotonic neural network. But essentially, the green part is the neural network without the constraints. That's very powerful. And the blue one is the linear regression with constraints. The green feeds into the blue. And it's AI with guardrails. And in healthcare, this is a big thing. We want to use AI, but we want to have guardrails. So this model, it's not quite as good as the other one, but that's because we have more control over it and we can interpret it better. So now it's within 3 degrees of arcuate sweep length. And if you work backwards, what we actually find is that you can expect the margin of error of the treated astigmatism to be within 0.15 diopters. So in summary, the current planners, there is some room for improvement. They've done really good, but you always want to look to see if there's anything else you can do. And we analyze retrospective data to build 2 AI-based models to analyze these complex interactions between multiple input features. Really, the sky's the limit with this. You can add more. You can see what happens. You test the model. You can try different. You were just asking about what is the interplay between the Cassini, and this is a perfect application for that. And the error that we got with these models is within 3 degrees of arcuate sweep, within 0.15 diopters of treated astigmatism. And these things can be personalized and they can improve, and they do improve as more data is introduced. It's available online right now through rojas.info. In about 2 weeks, we're going to be adding 400 more eyes, and then it'll basically be done for a while. But even now, it performs pretty well.
Fantastic work. That's definitely taking it to the next level. Do you foresee that all of these factors, as you learn more and identify whether it's white to white or age or whatever it might be, whatever factors, axial length, that all of that data can be then automated into the laser system, into the software? It pulls all that, right? And then it will have a nomogram built in and then can treat it based on these factors?
That's 100% the goal, just to make the whole thing automated, to not have transcription errors. And LENSAR is really well situated for that because they already push the data from these different devices. Likewise, Zeiss, Veracity, there are a lot of options for this, and that is the ultimate goal. If you go to the website now, you can play with it, but you still have to plug in this stuff. But that would be ultimately the goal. And then you could start with something like this. You could start with the ward SCPTA. You could start with anything, and then basically run over 50 patients and see if there's anything that might tweak for your individual case. Maybe your SIA is a little different. Maybe your LENSAR parameters are different. It changes it. Maybe you want to start trying it with TKs. So you can do anything like that. You can take something that's good and you can try to customize it further.
Most of us in this room are using premium technologies to achieve premium outcomes, and often this is in routine cases. These things are also possible in complex cases. So this was a 51-year-old male who was referred to me for evaluation of his cataract, and he had history of a penetrating injury to his left eye when he was 8 years old. And you can see here on the imaging, so on the cross-sectional images, so penetrating injury goes all the way through the cornea, through the iris, anterior capsule, into the lens, and I think into the posterior capsule. But surprisingly here, when you look at his tomography, it's very regular, right? I mean, this really looks like somebody that would benefit from a toric IOL. I'll talk you guys through the video here. As these cases can sometimes go a little bit haywire, I coordinated this on a day where my favorite retina surgeon was operating next door. So I have put some Yamani markings in, and he put some trocars in for me, just in case things get complicated. So capsulotomy is taken out, and that was one of the initial concerns, was that I was going to get an anterior run out, so that goes okay. We do hydrodelineation here. Again, I don't know, is anterior capsule intact? Is posterior capsule intact? So I take it nice and slow here, working my way through, getting all the lens material out, at least for the central nucleus. And then I shift over here to using some viscodissection to peel that epinucleus and cortex off of the capsule, hoping that I find that there's no
rent on the front or in the back. Moving over now, just taking out the rest of everything, and surprisingly, capsule held up just fine. We perform a little sneaky lysis here, and because the capsule is intact and everything's holding okay, we were able to place a toric lens. I did use the toric markings from the laser. I just ended up putting these in the cornea. So toric lens goes in just fine. And at 1 month, we yagged that little bit of scarring in the posterior capsule, and he ended up 20/20.
Do you think you would have had more trouble with this case if you'd done it manually?
I mean, that was my worry, that as I'm bringing that capsulotomy around, that if there's some scarring, if I get into trouble there, that now, you're moving around. And my hope was that I was just able to do the femtocapsulotomy. It would cut through nicely, and then you're off to the races.
I appreciate that you did just the capsulotomy with the laser and not fragmentations, and because the pressure and the air can really tear that posterior. And I also like to go smaller with the capsulotomy so that it allows me to do an optic capture or, do a sulcus lens with an optic capture. So that was a great case.
Thank you all for all your participation and dedication. You guys have been a really big part of this company and this journey, and have taught me so much. It's really quite a moment to have it all come together and see LENSAR do so well.